Gas hissed from the primary vault valves with a violent scream. No air, no pressure, no survival. Behind the triple-reinforced glass of Sphere 9, 82 top students from the galaxy's elite high-pressure worlds slammed their heavy limbs against the metal floor plates, clawing frantically at their breathing tracts. They begged to quit the Class 4 vacuum test, their emergency transponders flashing a chaotic wall of amber alerts across the central console grid. High Evaluator Xyler kept his grip on the primary pressure dial, his 6 eyes tracking the main display as the numbers tumbled toward 0. The system recorded a total flatline of environmental air, but the human recruit remained seated in the center of the void. She did not fall. Her heart rate did not spike. Daisy merely sat on the vibrating steel grate, her small hands resting against her knees while the rest of the cohort passed out around her. The automated logs recorded every second of the incident. I suggest you observe the data closely. Stay near. 3 hours before the pumps started, the morning registration line had formed along the outer deployment deck under a harsh, unfiltered industrial light. Xyler adjusted his digital ledger, his crystalline outer joints crackling like breaking glass as he pulled up the personal file for the final recruit. The human stood at the very rear of the armored line. Daisy weighed 52 kilograms, carried no external armor plates, and possessed a slight frame that made her standard-issue uniform bunch awkwardly at her wrists. Under her arm, she carried a small, scratched metal lunchbox with a primitive wire handle and a fading picture of an ancient Earth rodent. Xyler entered a definitive 12-second failure marker beside her name on the terminal track. His training manual stated that unplated bipeds could not endure deep pressure shifts without immediate biological collapse. The human will fail within 12 seconds, Xyler said to his chief technician, his shoulder joints popping with absolute certainty. Daisy did not look up from the queue. She simply checked the metal latch on her primitive container, entirely unbothered by the heavy infantry boots stamping around her. The training dome sealed with a concussive hydraulic thud that rattled the viewports. Inside Sphere 9, 82 elite recruits took their positions in perfect geometric squares. Daisy walked to the back row, setting her dented box down beside her heels. The floor beneath them hummed as the first stage of the test initialized, pulling the atmospheric density down to a sharp baseline. The air thinned instantly. The sudden drop caused the heavy Krelvath trainees to expand their chest plates, their internal air sacs straining against the loss of ambient gas. Daisy did not take a defensive stance. She merely reached down and adjusted her oversized uniform sleeve. The barometric dial slid lower, crossing the standard safe limits of the outer core. The air began to whistle as it fled through the upper intake vents. Across the chamber floor, the elite recruits began their expected survival protocols. The Krelvath soldiers dropped to all 4 lower limbs, sealing their breathing spiracles with thick protective mucus to trap their internal moisture. Beside them, the Zoral avian scouts flapped their wings in a panicked effort to locate non-existent thermal currents. Xyler checked Daisy's biometric monitor on his display. The console flashed a warning line, showing a complete lack of stress response. The sensor grid must be losing connectivity, the technician whispered, his heat-sensitive scales turning a deep shade of violet against his console. Xyler did not answer. He leaned closer to the reinforced viewport, his joints popping as his blood pressure rose. Daisy had not dropped to the steel grate. Instead, she sat down cross-legged, placing her metal lunchbox between her knees. The click of the iron latch opening bounced clearly through the open audio line into the command booth. The pressure inside the sphere plunged past the threshold where standard blood analogs began to boil. The remaining air was now too thin to carry the sound of the trainees' groans. 45 recruits reached for their hips, triggering their emergency transponders to signal the automated medical drones. The extraction elevator surged upward, lifting the unconscious heavy infantry from the simulation floor. Daisy ignored the flashing emergency lights and the rushing drones. She reached into her container and pulled out a square package wrapped in thick foil. The loud, metallic crinkle of the paper filled Xylo's audio pickup as she carefully peeled the covering back. "Evaluator," the technician stammered, pointing a shaking digit at the terminal. "The internal pressure of her cell structure should be fracturing her tissue. She is not breathing." "Increase the vent draw," Xylo commanded, his crystalline knuckles cracking like dry twigs. "Take it past the safety interlocks. Empty the room completely." He reached across the terminal and struck the manual override switch. The primary vacuum pumps responded with a deep, grinding roar that shook the foundation of the Academy deck. The readout tumbled toward zero. The last 30 Zoral recruits collapsed into their safety harnesses, their air sacs completely deflated by the massive suction. Medical drones scrambled across the grates in a frantic wave, stacking 82 unconscious elite warriors onto anti-gravity stretchers before retreating through the pressure gates. Daisy remained alone in the center of the 40-meter dome. She held the unwrapped piece of grain and cured meat to her mouth, taking a slow, rhythmic bite. She chewed with a steady pace, looking up at the ceiling intake vents as they strained against the vacuum. The terminal console flashed an aggressive, terminal amber alert. The system had hit its absolute mechanical limit, holding a total void within the chamber walls. There was no air left to pump. Xylo stared at the viewing window, his mind refusing the physical data on his monitors. The human biped was still chewing. She shifted her position on the grate, dusted a stray particle from her knee, and swallowed. A sharp chime cut through the noise of the console alarms. A priority data packet from the Sector Admiralty bypassed the local system block, loading a delayed regional biological file onto Xylo's screen. The document had been held in the Colonial Office for 8 solar months due to a logging error. The data loaded. The screen shifted. The system froze. Xylo read the crisp text lines as they populated his display. The report stated that the human homeworld possessed a base atmospheric pressure matching the Academy's maximum survival test standard. High-altitude human settlements operated indefinitely in conditions that would liquefy a Vraxiid lung. The file concluded with a notation that human survival specialists regularly climbed frozen, airless mountain peaks purely for recreational leisure. Xylo's model of the universe shattered against the glass. He looked down at the human, his jaw slack. The Academy had spent decades engineering a terrifying, lethal test of maximum endurance, and they had configured it to match what Daisy's grandfather would consider a brisk autumn walk. Daisy took another bite of her lunch. She tilted her head toward the overhead speaker grid, her voice carrying flatly through the open communication line. "A bit dry," she said into the empty void. "Needs mayo." The evaluation cycle reached its timed conclusion. The system interlocks released, and safety oxygen flooded back into Vault 9 with an immense, concussive hydraulic thud. The sudden rush of wind whipped past the empty grates, clearing the remaining dust from the testing floor. Daisy stood up, balancing her weight easily on her heels as the air stabilized. She took the foil wrapping, placed it neatly back inside her container, and snapped the primitive wire latch closed. She looked up at the main observation viewport, caught Xylo's eyes, and gave a small, polite wave before walking toward the exit corridor. The Coalition Barometric Testing Manual is currently being burned. Effective next cycle, human recruits are entirely exempt from vacuum evaluation, reclassified under a permanent strategic unknown directive. The scratched metal box has been transferred to the central command hall, placed behind thick protective shielding as a Class 1 strategic artifact. It rests under static force fields, a cold warning to every officer who enters the Academy gates. The galaxy's most terrifying void is simply another species afternoon picnic.